Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our mini series, Simon Says, where my special guest all this week is chairman of the Choices Estate Agency Group, Simon Shinerock, over there in sunny Spain. And Simon, today we thought we would talk about rents post-COVID. And as with property prices, I think this is just as hard, to really have an opinion on, because essentially when lockdown came, the property market just froze and went into complete stagnation because obviously nobody could move, nobody could re-let a property, etc. So what's your view now, post-COVID, how rents are going to do?
Yeah, so it's actually a really interesting question. I mean, I put over quite a positive view about what I think prices will do. I actually think that there will be a lot more softness on rents for a while anyway. And I think the reason for that is because I think a lot more people will stay put, so there won't be as much movement in the market, which in theory shouldn't make much difference, because if someone moves from one property to a next property, there's still movement going on. But I still feel that sort of desire to stay put will mean that families don't split up as much as they were before. And I don't mean splitting up necessarily by divorce, although that might actually happen too. But I mean, if you get 3 or 4 sharers, sometimes they do a bit better and they decide they're going to go and get a 2-bedroom apartment with a partner. People are staying at home with mum and dad. And I think all of that will serve to reduce demand, to some extent anyway. And but on the other hand, I think that there's going to be some other factors which may or may not affect rents as such. But I do think there's going to be tremendous difficulties in some of the Airbnb type rentals that there have been. So I think some supply will go out of the market in that sense. But that supply will then come onto the long-term market.
Yeah, so it might cause a bit of a spike of kind of oversaturation.
Yes, and I think the kind of people who would have taken an Airbnb or, would have taken, perhaps gone into an HMO on a room, they'll have other alternatives, whatever those other alternatives might be. But I think that the stock, which will be then made ready to go to long-term rent, will have an effect, at least short-term anyway. So I think that if, my watchword really always with landlords is that ultimately your return is down to occupancy, much more than anything else. So, having a really compliant property, providing a really good experience for your tenants, making sure that you never have unnecessary voids is much more important. And all I would say to landlords is it will be selective, because there's going to be areas in which there is more demand always, than supply. But we're already seeing some competition. I mean, take Gatwick. We've got 2 offices that surround Gatwick. There's going to be immense disturbance in that area for a while.
And maybe Heathrow as well, and maybe Stansted.
Yeah, I mean, so it's too early to say exactly how that's going to pan out, but I've seen downturns in lettings, in rents. And what I've always said to landlords, and this always comes up when you get a new development and you've been told you're going to get £1,000 a month for the property or £1,200 a month for the property, and then suddenly 30 properties become available all at once. And what a lot of landlords tend to do, and in my view, it's an enormous mistake, it's understandable, is they stick to their guns. They want their 1,200, they want their £1,000. But unfortunately, there's so many properties on the market at that point that then property sits empty for much longer than it needs to. So what I've always advised landlords is to offer incentives. Half rent for the first month, maybe even longer, up to 2 months, 3 months even as an incentive. It's sometimes better to do that and attract a good tenant, than drop the rent. Because dropping the rent from 1,000 to 950 is not that appealing to a lot of people. Whereas going from 1,000 to 500 for 3 months might sound crazy, But if it gets you a great tenant and they're going to be there for 4 years or 5 years, it makes sense in the long run. So you just have to be very aware, I think, as a landlord, about what's going on in the local market and respond to it accordingly. There's no real point in me saying, the whole of the UK, the rents will go up or down. I mean, that's just literally taking a finger and I think pointing it in the air like that, really. But if I had to stick my neck out, I would say that rents are going to be soft for the first few months coming out of this. And after that, I think that, demand will build up and confidence will come back. And I would say that there is a good chance that rents will then start rising again, probably into next year.
Okay, well, that's interesting, Simon. I think one thing that we have to factor in to how rents are going to perform is actually the extension of furlough, because I think there's going to be a lot of fallout for that. There are people on furlough that don't yet realise that they don't have a job to go back to. And as the furlough is withdrawn over the next 3 or 4 months, then we're going to see the real fallout of unemployment.
Yes.
And a lot of tenants will need to be in receipt of housing benefit.
Yeah.
And landlords are going to have to start engaging with the whole process of getting a tenant onto benefits and working with the DWP, which some may have no experience of. So, we've got a few months before we see the true fallout of COVID-19, I think.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think a lot of it's like watching a bit of a slow motion, sort of landslide, really. So we're seeing some of it now, but I absolutely agree with you. I think the furlough has masked an issue which will unfold. And it will affect some industries much, much more so than others, and therefore some areas much, much more so than others. But I do agree with you again that the DWP is going to be the point of reference for a lot of people, whether they like it or not, and their attitudes are going to have to change towards it. I agree. And I think that disturbance will take, that's why I think that next year really is the earliest we're going to see any sort of normalisation. And I also think that you could make a little bit of a parallel with when the collieries closed and some of these villages never recovered. Yeah, there's a much more fluid market now. We're much more mobile and we've got a lot more technology and we can respond a lot more quickly. But I think it's going to put some industries into shock. And I think some of the people will be in shock sort of permanently, if you like. Yeah. So I think there will be, unfortunately, some longer term effects of this. But I also think there'll be some very positive things that come out of it. I think that a lot of things which were happening anyway in our society are going to speed up enormously. Like this, really. I mean, these types of videos were happening. They're happening all over the place now, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I think that this whole thing is going to spur change. And I said to you in our last video that I tend to be more of an optimist than a pessimist. That doesn't mean I'm going to be right all of the time, but I just believe in the fact that there will be solutions to these issues and they won't go on forever. But yes, there will be some lasting effects. And I think if you're a landlord, you just have to be pragmatic about it. If you're lucky, and it turns out that your property's in high demand and the rents stay high, great, And if you're unlucky, don't make yourself unluckier by living in the past. Respond to the situation in which you find yourself. And I think that once again, these low interest rates are so much of a factor that's underestimated throughout my entire career. When you look at the value equation that we've got now, if you're going to have, the one thing I always say to people is, if you could borrow money at 0%, how much would you borrow? And people always look at me funny and they go, oh, well, and I go, well, the answer is very simple. All of it, as much as you can get. If you can borrow money at that rate indefinitely, obviously, this is a hypothetical situation, and you can actually get 1% return, you're making an infinite return, aren't you? So when you look at what's going on in the housing market at the moment, provided you don't overexpose yourself as a landlord, and assuming you're not wanting to sell your property right now, that it doesn't much matter whether the prices fluctuate up or down. What matters is, are you going to make a profit? Can you carry on in business? And as I say, I think that the signs are that for most of the market, that will be the case. And any short-term bumps that happen will be relatively short-term as the economy readjusts to a post-COVID world. New opportunities arise. Some of the people who have to go down the DWP route will not be on there forever. And the ones that are, well, we've seen that before as well.
Yeah, those very, very sage words there, Simon. Thank you. I think just to close this one out, I think what COVID-19 has done really on the letting side of things has really brought into sharp focus the relationship between the landlord and the tenant, and also lettings agents and tenants. And those that nurtured good relationships and had good communications will have probably come through this relatively unscathed. I mean, I don't manage any of our properties ourselves. I use letting agents, and I select all my lettings agents because I want them to be a reflection of me as a landlord. And all my agents have been brilliant throughout this crisis. I've actually only had one tenant in financial difficulty, but I've worked closely with my agents to keep those tenant relationships on board and work with tenants in an empathetic manner. And I think landlords mustn't underestimate the importance of agents in this post-COVID world. They know their area like the back of their hand.
You know, it's easy for me to say, yes, I agree with you because I'm an agent. But I think that all of my experience now and all of the statistics say that if you look at the 50% of landlords that properly use agents, they get more rent and less problems. And if you look at the 50% that don't, they get less rent and they get more problems. Mm-hmm. And yes, there will be the odd agent that's crap, and you will get the odd landlord that's brilliant. But if you take the law of averages, by putting somebody who knows what they're doing between you and your tenants, it can only be a good thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's even more important now that people are buying out of their area.
Yeah,
where they don't even know where, they don't know the area well, and there's no reason why they shouldn't, because you shouldn't be driven by buying property in your backyard. I mean, one of the things that's happened as a result of COVID is it's like taking the blurred glasses off and seeing things for what they are for the first time, and you see all these wonderful tools that we've had available to us for so long, that we haven't even been using. And you think to yourself, why didn't we use those before? And I think that the same thing goes. And I hate to say it, but again, we are promoting our advanced rent option, and I have to say we get a huge number of inquiries from people who've never used agents, and unfortunately their attitude is very much, well, why should I pay an agent? And I try to explain, that you're not paying the agent really, because they're very often adding so much value that it's a cost-free experience if it's done right. Mm. And the other thing I can tell you for sure is this, that because we get so many inquiries, a lot of them have already got tenants in situ. And when you go underneath the surface, the reason they're inquiring a lot of the time is because they're in trouble, And before we even start to talk about paying them a year's rent up front, we offer them landlord rescue services to regularise what they've got and get them out of trouble first, So it's a step-by-step process. I mean, it's much cleaner where we get somebody who's got an empty property, to be honest. But when we do get a landlord that comes to us and they are managing their own property, as we've had sometimes people have been retiring and they've got, oh, look, I just can't be bothered with this anymore. Or they've got something to do with the money and it's in perfect apple pie order. I've got to tell you, that is the exception, not the rule.
Okay, well, it's very interesting, Simon, what you said. I just want to pick up on the fact you mentioned about landlords buying out of area or out of their known locations. I think one thing we can say in a post-COVID world is that risk is massively amplified.
Yeah. If you make the wrong decision, do you mean?
Yeah, if the risks that were there before about not really understanding an area or tenant demand or tenant, how to reference a good tenant, how to vet a tenant, all of those risks that are inherent in being a landlord are actually massively amplified during this kind of post-COVID fallout.
Well, I mean, I would have said always do your due diligence, always do your research, always know what you're buying. But let's face it, we're all human and we get tempted to do things. I always have encouraged people to spend a bit more on a great property that will go up in the long run because there's solid demand locally, rather than focus on the cheap price right now. Maybe buy into an area where the quality of tenant isn't going to be there on a longer term basis. But that doesn't always happen, and sometimes people don't have the finance and they're forced to take chances. But once again, I totally agree with you that it would be even more important now to go in with your eyes open and assess the risks and evaluate them properly, and have a realistic assessment of what you're going to expect. And yes, that means that in some areas you would stand back at the moment, and probably we wouldn't buy. But that doesn't mean that there won't be opportunities that arise. And again, judgment comes into it, because there are people who make bold decisions, and I've seen that happen over time as well. Specifically in the recession that was in the 90s, where things looked like they were going to go down forever. And again, that was all to do with mortgage interest rates more than anything else, and the lack of availability of mortgage finance, which drives so many things. And yes, at certain points it looked like there was no light at the end of the tunnel, but there always is. But the most important thing, I think, if you're choosing a property, especially if, for the first time, if you've got one, well, you've got to do the best you can with it, whatever it happens to be. But if you're going into a buying spree now and you think now's the right time to buy, just be very realistic and do your sums really carefully, and try and take 20% off whatever you think you're going to get back, and leave yourself reserves.
Fantastic advice. Thank you, Simon. And I will drop a link below this video to the advanced rent option information, and also to our Landlord Risk Mitigation Week content, where we looked at various different risks and how to mitigate them, because I think that's very good to bring that back into play in the context of our discussion today. Now, tomorrow, Simon, we are going to be talking about newcomer landlords and how they can enter the sector safely. I can imagine you're going to say that they shouldn't dive straight into HMOs, but we shall see tomorrow. So for today, thank you for joining me, Simon, and everybody watching, thank you very much. Please do jump across to propertytribes.com if you have any questions for Simon. He is on hand to answer anything you may have to say about this conversation. Otherwise, we look forward to welcoming you to Wednesday's edition of Simon Says tomorrow. So join us there.